Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Erica Palmer. I'm a co-founder and executive director of the Independent Restaurant Coalition. Today is a day filled with hope for so many of America's independent restaurants and bars. Nearly 1 year ago, our coalition was founded on the principle that if small businesses worked together and unified our voices, we would be heard. And we were right. Last April, the independent restaurant and bar community told Congress we needed a grant program in addition to PPP to survive this pandemic, and they listened. We are so deeply grateful to Senators Schumer, Wicker, and Sinema, and Representatives Blumenauer and Fitzpatrick for fighting with us every single day to create this program and save restaurants. The $28.6 billion grant program about to be signed by President Biden will make the difference between shuttered storefronts and open doors. On our daily Zoom calls with members of the restaurant community over the last year, the stories have just been absolutely heartbreaking. So many of my colleagues have had to shut down, often permanently, because of COVID's devastating and unique impact on our industry. Today, the heartbreak starts to heal, and everyone that depends on restaurants and bars for their livelihood, the 500,000 small businesses, the 11 million workers, from dishwashers to farmers, servers to florists to chefs, each of them can sleep a little easier and start dreaming of a post-pandemic future. And none of that would have been possible without the support of our champions in Congress. We are very much looking forward to continuing working with the White House to implement this legislation and ensure it includes outreach to every corner of the country and reaches the people who need it most. Gregory, I'll let you take the mic.
Thank you so much, Erica, and good day to everyone. It is a good day indeed. My name is Gregory Gourdet. I am the chef of Khan Restaurant here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm just really excited to be here. The American Rescue Plan will have a profound impact on our nation's community, and this new $28.6 billion restaurant grant fund will help countless restaurants make payroll, pay off debts, and survive this brutal pandemic that's already shuttered so many great American restaurants, including so many of my dearest colleagues. It's a vital lifeline that's our best shot at hiring back the 2 million people who lost their jobs during the pandemic. This employment crisis disproportionately affects Black, Indigenous, and people of color, women, immigrants, the youth, and other marginalized communities. The program itself was modeled off the Bipartisan Restaurants Act, which was introduced into the House by my very own Representative Earl Blumenauer and was strongly supported by Leader Schumer. Thanks to their leadership, as well as the leadership of Senator Wicker in Mississippi and Representative Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania, the bill now has wide bipartisan support in Congress. I would like to now pass the mic to Representative Blumenauer to say a few words.
Thank you, Chef. Thanks for the introduction and for your leadership with the IRC. It is an honor to be here with you, and Leader Schumer, we wouldn't be here without you. There's so much going on that you're going to be able to get across the finish line, and I'm glad you were able to make a difference for independent restaurants. Nearly a year ago, after the world suddenly shut down, I visited with Gregory, with Naomi Pomeroy, with Erica, to discuss how Portland's local independent restaurants, literally the beating heart of our community, would get through this pandemic. Because Portland is an amazing food community. What started in Portland as an effort to save our beloved restaurants became a national movement because we found every community cares deeply about their restaurants and they are part of their beating hearts. I am ecstatic that Congress is moments away from passing our $28.6 billion in relief for the hardest hit sector of our economy. I appreciate how they have been relentless in helping us drive this point. Over 2 million restaurant and bar workers are out of a job due to the pandemic. But thanks to this effort, help is on the way. The grants could very well make the difference between survival for some of our most cherished institutions, losing them perhaps forever. And none of this would have been possible without the partnership with the IRC. This is a group of fiercely creative, independent restaurant owners and workers who coalesced very quickly beginning of the pandemic. I can't say how inspirational I found our countless Zoom meetings together, hearing what you were doing, and how you remained focused, how you drove that message out. From late night calls on Zoom strategy sessions, working with IRC has been awe-inspiring. Even when I had to get up at 6 a.m. for your early morning East Coast meetings. And when our proposal was stuck in Mitch McConnell's legislative graveyard, you refused to give up because we know that it's the best opportunity to save independent restaurants. Even our independent Save Our Restaurants masks, you folks thought of everything. Today, after a year of hard work, we're filled with hope that this proposal finally heads to the president's desk. But we know much more work needs to be done. There's $1 trillion supply chain for independent restaurants that we need to work to strengthen. And we have to work with the IRC, the White House, the Small Business Administration to ensure this program reaches our hardest hit local restaurants. We worked hard to put protections for smaller institutions in this, but we're going to have to work to make sure that those guardrails are respected. And then we have other work to do from immigration and, as I mentioned, the supply chain. This is the start, however, for the great American restaurant recovery. I'm honored to be with Leader Schumer and with you. And now I'd like to hand it over to Amanda Cohen from New York City, by the way, to say a few words. She gave some killer testimony last summer explaining why the PPP didn't work and why we needed a grant program. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Representative Blumenauer, and thank you so much for all your support. My name is Amanda Cohen, and I own Dirt Candy. It's an all-vegetable restaurant on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I've been fortunate enough to own this restaurant for 13 years, and what started off as a tiny 350 square foot restaurant with 2 employees and really big dreams has grown into, well, an adult-sized restaurant with 35 employees. Over the summer, I testified before the House's Committee on Small Businesses on the crisis restaurants were facing and still are facing. In my testimony, I implored Congress to find a way to help independent restaurants. Today, I can confidently say that Congress heard me. The $28.6 billion program for our broken businesses will help countless restaurants not only survive this pandemic, but it will also help make them whole again. In the past few months, I've had the pleasure of working directly with my senator, Leader Schumer, to get this done. Just a few weeks ago, the senator stood beside me in my restaurant and promised to get this done. He kept his promise, and I am a grateful New Yorker today. Thanks in large part to his work in the Senate, independent restaurants like mine have reason for hope and reason to dream again for the first time in a very, very long time. And for that, I will be forever grateful. I'd now like to pass the mic over to Leader Schumer to say a few words.
Of visiting and your testimony and just your steadfastness. And I also want to thank Tom Colicchio, who I'll introduce in a minute, and the IRC for the great job that you have all done to bring this to the fore and never quitting. I love restaurants. If you're a New Yorker, if you're a Brooklynite, no offense, Amanda, I do cross the bridge and go to restaurants in Manhattan too. But if you're a New York, restaurants are our heart and soul. It's one of the ways we get together and mix and mingle. We're a diverse city with people from all over the country and all over the globe. And we get together in restaurants and we see each other, talk to each other. They're the lifeblood of New York, the lifeblood of New York. But it's not just big cities like New York. They're the lifeblood of many small rural communities. They're the lifeblood of many suburban communities. So I love restaurants. And I also love small business. You know, my dad was a small businessman, and I know how small business people struggle. He had the opposite of a restaurant. He had a little exterminating business. You bring things and tastes alive. He killed things for the good of people's health. But he would pace the floor Sunday nights at 2 a.m. because of the difficulties of running a small business. It's hard enough to run a restaurant not under COVID. When COVID comes, boom. And we had so many restaurants go out of business. You know, when I see closed permanently on the signs of some of the restaurants that I used to patronize, it just breaks your heart. Because it's not just a storefront, it's a restaurant's an organic thing. And the owners and the chefs, and if there's under chefs and the waiters and the waitresses and the people who even clean the floor, they're part of a team. And one of the jobs of this bill is to keep that team together. Without this bill, it was estimated that 1/3 of New York restaurants across the state, and we're a diverse state, we have the 3rd largest rural population in America, would have closed. So it comes in the nick of time. And I was so happy to push it and make it happen. Our plan will get independent restaurants cooking again. And the first bill, you know, as majority leader, Mitch McConnell was never friendly to this. But as majority leader, I have the ability to put things on the floor. And the first amendment I ever put on the floor as majority leader was the Restaurants Act. And I was proud to say that it was co-sponsored by a Democrat and a Republican. Democrat, Kirsten Sinema of Arizona, and a Republican, Roger Wicker of Mississippi. And it had the same bipartisan type of backing that Earl assembled so ably in the House of Representatives. And so we so much appreciate it. And the bill now has been working with the IRC. It's really designed well. It's a grant. It's going to last at least through September, when, God willing, COVID will be in great reduction. We make sure that our independent restaurants, not these big chains, can come in and get it. You know, we don't want Lobster Pound or Olive Garden. We have nothing against them, but they don't need the help the way our independent restaurants do. The eligible expenses restaurateurs is very broad, very broad. And so that will be helpful as well. And we try to have some emphasis for small restaurants. So we have 2 goals today. One, urge the SBA to stand up the new restaurant relief program as soon as the bill is signed into law. And we as Senate Democrats are going to move the president's nominee for the SBA forward very, very soon. And she has told me, I've told her already when I met with her, you got to get this moving fast because our restaurants are hurting and need the help. But second, we want to get the word out to independent restaurants. Not all of them are as plugged in as the people on this Zoom, because people are so busy with running their restaurants and their families and the ups and downs of life that God visits on every one of us. So please, we want to get the word out. Restaurants, help is on the way, real help. So God willing, when we beat COVID, you'll be bigger, better, stronger, more frequent than ever before. I love restaurants. It's a pleasure to help, and we'll stick with you and make sure that it's implemented quickly and fairly. And if God forbid we need to renew it, we'll be there as well. So thank you. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce another fellow New Yorker whose restaurant I have eaten at long before COVID on many occasions, and who I've known before. But he, you know, this man's a very successful man, and he used his success for the good of many, many more. And that's an important thing. He could have just sat on his laurels, but he was out there relentlessly making sure, and he was real smart, as you all were in the IRC. You knew when to push, when not to push. You knew exactly how to craft good legislation and get it done. And I think without the IRC, I mean, I know Earl and I are very proud of what we've done, but without you and without Tom, I don't know if it would have gotten done at all. So it is my pleasure to introduce my fellow New Yorker, my friend, and a charitable, wonderful, caring man, Mr. Tom Colicchio.
Thank you. You say I can call you Chuck, so I'll call you Chuck.
Yes, I don't like this
Thank you,
senator,
Senator.
or leader business. Chuck is good.
Leader, I should say. Listen, I can't take credit for this. You know, when the story is told about the Independent Restaurant Coalition and the Restaurant Act being included in the stimulus package, this is a grassroots story. This is about a bunch of chefs and restaurateurs who were completely devastated, and who decided not to sit back and not to wait. They just took action, because that's what independent restaurants are all about. We take action every single day. It's about improving our restaurants, and we don't wait around. And so this is a story about people who just came together and decided that we're going to help, obviously, each other, but the entire industry. And as President Biden once said, and my friend Sam Cass likes to say, this is a big deal. And this is going to save so many restaurants. And you're right. Yes, I'm I hate to say celebrity chef, and yeah, I could sit back on my laurels, but you know what? I remember when I was a 26-year-old desperate to find investors to open my first restaurant, and thought about, what if this were 26 years ago when I finally opened my first restaurant and COVID hit? What would I do? And so that's the voice that I used. And I have to say, we have our champions, every single person on this call, every single person who made those phone calls and just implored everyone to just help out. Those calls, those first calls, that people who never spoke to politicians, who made those phone calls and realized they were really good at it. And they were really good at it because they were advocating for themselves. And so there's so many champions. Earl Blumenauer, thank you so much for all that you do, for the work that you've done on hunger, and for the work that you've done for small farmers, and obviously for writing this bill for us, and Roger Wicker and Kristen Sinema for being our early sponsors, and so many other people like Jim McGovern and Shelley Pingree, who the first phone call I made, she said, of course, anything that you need. But really what it comes down to is Senator Schumer. Too often it said that politicians don't keep their promises. And you made a promise to us that you were not going to forget us, and you didn't. And I have to say, when Joe Biden's bill came out and we were not included in there was disappointment and there was sadness, and we thought a year's work was going to go down the tubes. And you made a promise that we were going to be in that bill, and you kept your promise, and we will never forget that. Again, too often we hear that politicians don't do that. You did it. You stuck your neck out there, and you did exactly what your title suggests you do, and that's lead.
Thank you.
And we will never forget that, and we will be there for you because you were there for us.
Thank you. And I
So-
forgot to mention one thing, Tom. The day the bill passed, this is what I wore, which you gave me on the floor of the Senate, our Save Our Restaurants mask.
I saw that. We
And I'm
were
putting it
all
on
in a
now.
watch party watching C-SPAN. And I have to say, C-SPAN was never so exciting. But this really, we have our champions, and but again, this is a grassroots story. This is a story. I mean, think about this. The Independent Restaurant Coalition did not exist a year ago. And I hope that this bill, I mean, it may get signed before then, but when we closed our restaurants, it was the 13th. And I would love to see President Biden sign this bill on the 13th, because it'll be a year to when we were closed. And when you think about doing what we did in a year, this is unprecedented. And I got to tell you, every single person who's on this call, every single member of the IRC, I love these people. I would go to war with them. I can't wait to be able to hug each one of you in person when we can. And we saved communities, we saved restaurants, we saved communities. I could say we even saved some lives. But thanks for this journey, and it's not going to end. We're here for the long haul. So thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Robert St. John from the New South Restaurant Group in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I'm also a founding member of the Independent Restaurant Coalition. I want to say thanks to Leader Schumer. I'm not comfortable calling him Chuck. And Representative Blumenauer, who I've worked with on a couple of these calls since last May, and I've grown to gain great respect of him. The first restaurant I opened was in 1987. Like Tom, I was 26 years old. I sold a little piece of land my grandfather had left me for $25,000. That was my stake. And starting that restaurant, in March of last year, we served our last meal before the shutdown, not knowing that would be the last meal we would ever serve in that restaurant. And within a matter of days, I was having conversations with my wife and kids that, we're probably going to lose this house and lose our businesses, and life is going to change drastically going forward. The outlook was dire. Like other restaurateurs, the decisions I make or affect my wife and kids, but also the 300 team members who work with me and their families and loved ones. So it was a lot of pressure back then. I joined the IRC in the opening days. And what I learned quickly is that the IRC, more than any other organization, was uniquely qualified to save independent restaurants because we had tunnel vision and we were focused on one common goal, and that was to save independent restaurants from the mass extinction event that we were facing. And at the time, the number we were hearing was that 85% of independent restaurants were likely to close during this pandemic. In addition to the present company here, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my home state senator, Senator Roger Wicker, who has been a lion in this fight for restaurants. Before this Zoom call, I was looking back through my texts and emails and trying to get some timelines in shape. And my first contact with Senator Wicker's office was March 19th, which is actually, I think, my first call with the IRC. My first contact with the senator was around March 29th. And I'll just tell you, he got it from day one. He understood the unique business model of restaurants. He realized our plight. He knew the challenges we were facing. And moving forward, Senator Sinema hopped on very quickly in that effort. I'm proud that Senator Wicker is my home state senator, but I'm even more proud of his role to save America's independent restaurants. So March of 2020 seems like 10 years ago. But in those early days, I didn't even expect to be here in this position a year later. But thanks to my fellow members in the IRC and the members in both chambers who fought to save independent restaurants, I'm just eternally grateful, as my family and the 300 team members, who I am glad to say all 300 team members are back in the fold. I ended up closing 3 properties, but we've just recently opened a new one. And this recent build moving forward is going to enable us to go forward and keep all of them employed. So once again, I want to say thank you to Representative Blumenauer, to Leader Schumer, and my home state Senator Wicker. And now we'll go from Mississippi to California and hear from my friend Carolyn Stein.
Carolyn, before you speak, I have to go to another Zoom at 11. So thank you. Let's stay in touch. Let's make sure this gets implemented well. Let's keep fighting, and I'll be with you all the way. I love restaurants. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Earl. Bye-bye.
Well, I was just going to tell him that I was born in New York and I feel a connection to him, but there you go. Anyway, I'm Carolyn Stein. I'm co-owner of the Loop Group in Los Angeles and obviously a member of the IRC. First of all, I just have to say that I want to say thank you, but I feel like thank you is not nearly enough gratitude to show to Representative Blumenauer, Senator Wicker, and Leader Schumer for making this moment possible, for pushing this legislation and recognizing that our industry is just too vital for our country to abandon. I get emotional about it because we've all been pushed to the brink, and the fact that these men and women in Congress and the Senate have pulled us back is just really so amazing. So as I think you all know, California's hospitality industry has been hit really hard by this pandemic. Many of our restaurants, all of our bars are still completely closed. And I have a successful restaurant group, so I know that if we are struggling, then so many smaller businesses are too. And now we all know that we're not just left alone to our own devices. Of the 11 million leisure and hospitality workers in the United States, California is home to over 2 million of them. And this last year, the numbers are really staggering. The sector accounted for 42% of all the jobs lost in that state. So devastating is not even a word that accurately portrays where we are in California right now. But this package will literally be the vehicle for So many small businesses, bars and restaurants to survive everywhere from down south in San Diego to San Francisco, a vital restaurant community, and to San Francisco and to Sacramento and everywhere in between. It'll get those who've been unemployed for over a year now, or almost a year now, back in their jobs. So I and my nearly 300 employees, thank you so much for your leadership, for recognizing that restaurants and bars and all of our many worthwhile employees are important and that we matter. And as I've said over and over again, this is more than a rescue plan. It's more than a relief package. It is literally a stimulus package that will really have an effect on the entire country's economy. So thank you, thank you, thank you. But of course, our work doesn't end here. And I will turn this back over to Erica to fill you all in on what the IRC is doing now.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, everyone, for speaking today. Well, we are truly thrilled and just absolutely full of gratitude at the passage of this critical lifeline. We also recognize that the work is far from over. And we're committed to making sure that the independent restaurant and bar community is aware of this program and that they have the tools they need to access it. We've hosted community roundtables nationwide with hundreds of people from the restaurant and bar community to learn so that we can share with them the latest on this bill. And we're going to keep doing that. As the process moves on, we will continue to update that information. We're also closely working with the White House and the SBA to ensure that the fund is made quickly available to the most vulnerable and hardest hit communities. I am so proud of what this coalition has been able to accomplish in just under a year. We have been laser focused on one goal. That one goal is creating a grant program for independent restaurants and bars. That goal started with a call of only 18 independent restaurant owners, and it has become a grassroots movement of over 100,000 people. And our community of 100,000 isn't sitting back either. They are actively engaging with Congress and their communities. In fact, they sent over 100,000 emails to Congress, and they've held hundreds of meetings with members of Congress to make this all possible. Of course, I don't even have, as Carolyn said, enough words. Gratitude, thanks, forever indebted to the amazing leadership of Senators Schumer and Wicker and Representative Blumenauer and Fitzpatrick. So many congressional champions who have stood by us. These champions that you see here with us today have listened to us, they've fought for us, they've been with us every step of the way, and we are forever grateful. I'd now like to open the floor to questions. Please use your little emoji hand to raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. Trish, you have a question. Trish Turner. Can we unmute Trish?
There we go. Can you all hear me?
We can now. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Sure. So just a question about implementation. So how soon, I know you all have to have seen that some of the programs that were stood up or were supposed to have been stood up by the December COVID, like Save Our Stages, there's a lot of delay. And so I just wonder how, can you just walk through, and maybe the congressman could do this, or I'm not sure who would be best, but just how quickly is this money going to be available to restaurateurs? And just would you, they just apply directly to the SBA? Does SBA have to stand up a whole new program? Can you just give us some of that detail, please? Thanks.
Let me just take a stab at it. We've got some other experts here who've helped refine this, but let me just say that it's going to be a matter, I think, of weeks, not months. You referenced some of the problems with Save Our Stages. Well, we're learning from that experience. And you heard Leader Schumer emphasize our deep concern that the SBA jump on this in a hurry. There is strong support from the House leadership. The chair of the Small Business Committee has been essential. Speaker Pelosi carved out space for us when it was really tough early to move this forward. This is a huge priority, and actually being a step behind some of these others. Part of what we've done in refining this legislation is based on the frankly, the failure of PPP to be able to relate to the restaurant industry. So all of these things are part of it. It is a priority. It will take time. We need to work to get the word out to the independent restaurants because we have some guardrails in this legislation to provide a boost for smaller enterprise, for people who are identified as most at risk. I think, as I say, it's going to be weeks rather than months, and the focus on the Small Business Administration has been pretty intense. I think it's going to be much smoother because of some of the other problems.
I will just add, Trish, that we are very encouraged by the conversations that we have had with the SBA and with the White House. We know they are working fast and furiously, and they are committed to making sure that this program is accessible and implemented as quickly as possible. So we do expect that it will be available sooner than later. Ledge from USA Today, you have a question? Are you having mute challenges?
I'm sorry. Yes, I am having mute. Can you hear me now? Thank you.
We can. Thank you.
And I'm sorry if I missed this a little bit earlier, but can you talk a little bit about how over the past year, how many restaurants closed? How many workers lost their jobs? Were there certain states that were, more affected by this, certain types of restaurants? Can you talk a little bit more about the human cost that has happened over the past year?
Absolutely. As of December, 110,000 restaurants had closed. And I believe 1 in 4 people that are unemployed as a result of the pandemic are restaurant workers. I'm going to ask Tom if he would like to chime in this answer as well.
Good question. I don't know the answer to that in terms of the amount of restaurants that have closed. The estimates early on by several organizations were that 75% of all restaurants would most likely close. I mean, clearly that has changed. I think a combination of Restaurant Act, restaurants that did receive PPP, and the fact that vaccines are getting rolled out at a very, very quick level right now gives us some confidence that maybe restaurants have stopped closing. But I know as early as just a couple of days ago, a friend of mine closed his restaurant permanently in New York, Dave Pasternak, who's been there for about 13 years in the theater district. And so restaurants are still closing. I'm hoping that restaurants that are faced with closing, that they can negotiate with their landlord, knowing that there is help coming, that maybe the landlord would give them a break going forward. Maybe they can hold off their suppliers for a little bit longer. But it's hard to say the exact number. I suspect it's somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 40%.
So we do know that 110,000 restaurants had closed by December, and that over 2 million workers from bars and restaurants have lost their job since the pandemic began.
Thank you.
I think just real quick, the good news is if you looked at last Friday's job report, it was led by hospitality. And this is the benefit of keeping restaurants intact, because that number will continue to go up and be led by hospitality because we're open. And this is what's really important, because if we can keep open, especially over the next couple of months, it can be really, really difficult because we're near, getting to capacity. I think in New York, we're at 35% right now in New York City. I think we're 75% outside of the city, but people are still very hesitant to come out. And so as these restaurants stay intact, that ensures that we'll create more and more jobs as we get past the pandemic. And that's what's crucially important about keeping restaurants open, is that the jobs that we will create in the future.
Thank you, Tom. We're going to turn to Joanna. from Nation's Restaurant News.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much. I was wondering, I keep getting from readers, when are we going to get information on how restaurants will be able to apply for grants? Will it be like the PPP or something else? Or?
Joanna, the program will be implemented through the SBA. We should see guidance start to appear on their website very shortly. As soon as the bill is signed, they can start going into action. As I mentioned, we've had numerous conversations with them. They are leveraging all of the lessons they've learned through the shuttered venue program and putting all of those to good work for this program. So the applications will be going through the SBA, and I will expect them to start providing information very shortly.
Thank you so much.
Megan Wilson.
Hi there, Megan Wilson with Bloomberg Government. Tom, you said that the Independent Restaurant Coalition isn't going away. I know on the call, y'all have talked with helping with implementation to make sure everything is rolled out with the grant program very smoothly, but just wondering if, and anyone can answer, but is the coalition going to become sort of a lobbying force going forward? Is it, do you have any plans for maybe next agenda items following, this grant program?
Tom, would you like me to take that instead?
Sure. Go ahead, Erica.
So the Independent Restaurant Coalition is not going away. We were formed because independent owners and operators across the country expressed a very distinct need and were eager to unify their voices to create positive change for this community. We have been singularly focused on making sure that there is funding available so that these restaurants can recover and get their people back to work and rebuild the supply chain that is so dependent on restaurants. We are fully committed to continuing to serve this community, and we are eager to hear what the community asks us to do. And so we will continue developing the organization once the grant program is implemented, but our very, very top priority right now is making sure that restaurants all across the country and communities large and small who haven't been on our Zooms not only know that this program exists, but have the tools available to access it. So for the next few months, you're going to see us continuing to be focused on making sure the program is working. We expect that with $28.6 billion, although that is an immense sum, that it won't be enough. So we're going to keep very close track of how the money is being distributed and make sure that we are working to refill it if needed. And then we'll be able to look ahead and find out how we can best support the community.
Erica, can I jump in here for a moment?
Of course.
Because I sincerely hope that the IRC continues not just to help us make sure that this legislation is properly implemented, because there's going to be a big push to be able to give people the information beyond what the Small Business Administration does. And the communication skills from your members are really highly refined. We saw them in action, and they can help us with the implementation. But I also think it's going to be important because it is not going to be enough. And we heard Leader Schumer be open to replenishing the fund. And I think we're going to have to take him up on that. And there'll be an effort in both the House and the Senate. And there's going to be fierce competition for resources going forward. And the IRC provides a network to be able to communicate that's going to be essential to be able to have it, not just in terms of replenishing the fund. I mentioned in my comments, there's $1 trillion supply chain. And in the course of the COVID crisis, we've seen weaknesses in that supply chain in terms of what happens from farm to fork. There's work that needs to be done there. There are problems with workforce. And there's been sort of chaos with the immigrant community, and a number of them are involved with this. I hope that the IRC becomes a permanent fixture in local communities and here in Washington, D.C. And I just want to brag on you for a moment, because this bill would not look like it does without the IRC. There are other groups that are involved with hospitality and beer and wine and chain restaurants and a whole host of folks that are out there with deeper pockets and more history. But they weren't fighting for independent restaurants. And you helped us craft provisions that were specific to your needs. And we need your voice to be able to make sure that it continues to get the priority and the focus. You helped us get to this point. It wouldn't look like it without you, but we need you to help us get across the finish line, because we need to be involved with an aggressive restaurant recovery program for independent restaurants.
Thank you, Congressman. Each and every one of us would walk into battle with you any day, and we are so thrilled to have you leading us. Our next question is from Heather Haddon. I hope I pronounced your name right, Wall Street Journal.
Yep, that's correct. And congrats and thanks for holding this. Just a couple of logistical technical questions. Looking at the release, it says grants will be made available to establishments that are not part of an affiliated group with more than 20 locations. I was curious, does that include franchisees? Like, can franchisees of chains apply for this? Because technically they are small businesses. Second question, the grant amounts will be based on the difference between 2019 and 2020 revenue. Is that 100% match potentially? And third question is, do you have any estimates on how many, restaurants, bars, I know there's a lot of categories here, but might be applicable to benefit from this? I would imagine it's quite a lot, but if you have any estimates, that'd be helpful.
Congressman, would you like to start by addressing the eligibility requirements?
Well, it was broadly defined that in terms of the building on the failures of PPP, where we're going to be focusing, there's, I think, $5 billion that's focused on people with a revenue of $500,000 in the prior years that are going to be getting a priority. Limit up at 10 million. It is going to be a challenge to make sure, I mentioned earlier, that we don't have some of the larger operations who would technically be eligible, to have them be able to scarf up a disproportionate amount of money earlier. We have a priority for women, veterans, restaurants to help them kind of get to the front of the line so that they are not left out with a rush that's going to come forward. Of the over almost 400,000 remaining independent restaurants, the need is very substantial, and we're going to, I think, watch the available resources decline and not be able to meet all of that need.
You also asked a question about how the revenue number was calculated for the grant amount. The Restaurants Act grant was intended to be revenue replacement, and it was conceived last year when Mr. Blumenauer expected this to be a 30-month problem, but the rest of us were much more hopeful that it was going to be a shorter problem. The way the grant amount is calculated is the gross revenue from 2019, you subtract your gross revenue in 2020, then you also subtract the amount of money you've received in PPP, and that is the amount that you are eligible for a grant. There is a cap of $5 million for individual entities or $10 million for restaurant groups. And I believe I may have missed one of your questions in there. If you'd like to re-ask it, I'd be happy to answer it.
In terms of franchisees, can franchisees of chains apply for this?
An entity with any business with less than 20 locations may apply for this funding.
Great, thanks.
The answer is yes.
One other thing, there is I believe there's a number by which your business needs to be depressed before you can access the funding. No,
That is
change
not It is a revenue change, Tom. It is a difference. You have to have your gross revenue from 2020 to 2019 minus the PPP funding that you've received. It's worth noting, since we're talking about how the grant amount is determined, that organizations who have received PPP 1 and 2, EIDL loans, or employee retention tax credits are able to apply for this money. And that is a difference between the shuttered venue program. Joyce Hanson, I believe. Do I have my Joyce? You have a question for us?
Hi, yeah, can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Joyce Hanson with Law 360. I have a question for Representative Blumenauer. Is President Biden's signature on the American Rescue Plan guaranteed? Tom Colicchio said he hopes the president will sign on March 13th, but do you know exactly when he will sign?
I'm not privy to the exact date. The president and others in the White House are involved with a massive effort to help the American public know what's there. But first, it has to get to his desk, and I'm going to run over in a few minutes to speak on it. We anticipate that it will arrive later today, and I anticipate that it will be signed sooner rather than later. But this is above my pay grade. But there's tremendous anticipation. And I would think that as soon as he can stage it properly, there's so much that's a part of this legislation. Leader Schumer is responsible with the work they've done in the Senate with a huge reduction in child poverty. I mean, there's every incentive for the president to sign it soon and then get out to be able to shout it from the rooftops of what's there and how to take advantage of it. But I don't know precisely.
Thank you.
Shauna Stewart.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
We can.
Shauna Stewart from AL.com. Quick question. So you all talked about how women-owned restaurants and restaurants owned by people of color and veterans would get priority. How are you trying to ensure that? I know you talked about having groups, and how are you trying to get the message out there to expedite them to the front of the line?
Amanda, would you like to talk about how the funding is allocated and supports smaller businesses?
Yeah, so there's definitely a provision in the bill that is geared towards women-owned, minority, and BIPOC businesses. And there is funding separated for small businesses. There's a $500,000. There's a, was it $5 billion? I just want to make sure I get the number right. That's allocated for businesses that make under 500,000, tend to be the mom and pop businesses. And then there will be a period when women-owned businesses and BIPOC businesses will be able to apply first before the rest of the businesses. And then in terms of getting the word out, that's the real work that we have to do now. That's what all our meetings are about for the next couple of weeks, how we can really involve the communities in our cities who weren't actually able or didn't even know about the PPP and weren't able to access it, how we can get them to access this money, because it's for them. It's not just for the people on this call, it's for every other small restaurateur out there who didn't have access to capital beforehand. This is geared towards them. They are our priority. They are the businesses that we really want to see succeed.
And Amanda, another category is for veterans.
Right, veterans. And so we'll be talking to small business associations and, some of the smaller restaurant groups. And like a lot of the cities have groups that are geared towards this. And we are going to try to get them involved as much as possible to get the word out. That's why we also need all of you on this call, all of you reporters and people who are writing these stories. It's your job too, to get these stories out there and ask them to participate in it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Amanda. I see we have a question from Al Gonzalez.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I guess my question is, my particular scenario is I have a restaurant that was opened in late 2019. Is our revenue going to be calculated based on the totality of months we were open? We were only open 2 days in October, then November and December. Is that been figured out how the revenue calculation is going to work in those types of scenarios?
Yes, I'm happy to answer that question. There are provisions for restaurants that have opened or were operating before 2019, restaurants that opened in 2019, and restaurants even that opened in 2020. So those will all be detailed on the SBA site as well. They are currently available on the saverestaurants.com site, but I'll give you a quick overview. For restaurants that opened in 2019, it will be an issue of taking the averages of your monthly gross revenue and multiplying them and subtracting your 2020 revenue from that. If restaurants opened in 2020, they'll be able to use the eligible expenses for the grant program with the eligible expenses that they incurred this year. I see that we have Joanna, your hand is back up again. Let's get back, make sure we have your questions answered.
Sorry about that. Sorry for the question, but thanks so much. I guess I just wanted to clarify that, kind of piggybacking on the franchisee question. Let's say I'm a McDonald's franchisee and I own 5 restaurants. Can I apply? Because obviously McDonald's has more than 20 locations, but as a business owner, I only own and operate 5.
Congressman, I see you nodding your head. Would you like to answer?
Yes. 20 or fewer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Representative.
That was a compromise.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Just to double check a moment, see if we have any other hands raised. So I will note, just because it seemed like there was a little bit of confusion about revenue loss and how the grant amount was calculated, you do have to have suffered a loss this year. You can't just apply for a grant, but there is not a delineating number like there are in the PPP programs. You have to demonstrate your loss by showing your gross revenue from 2019 and your gross revenue in 2020, and it is the difference between the two. And then based on that, you also subtract the money you've received from the PPP, and that will lead to the amount you are able to apply for in a grant fund. I believe we have a question from Joyce.
Yeah, I did have a follow-up for Representative Blumenauer, which is you said something about how you're about to run over now to the House floor. So what exactly is happening today?
Well, we're voting on the Senate's response to this legislation, and we have to approve the version that has some changes that they made, not universally approved over here, but benefit far outweigh. And I think if there were any question, the restaurants bill by itself would take it across the finish line. So we're working on some gun safety legislation, but we have to approve the final form from the Senate amendments, which we will do. And in fact, one of only 2 Democrats that voted against it has decided he's going to support it. One of our own Oregonians. So we're quite confident that it'll pass, and it's not too late for some Republicans to reconsider. I think it would be good for them to climb on board, but we have enough Democratic support to send it to the president today.
So we'll take our last question from Shauna Stewart. Shauna, do we have you?
Sorry, unmuting. I had some unmuting problems there. My last question, I guess, is how, because like with PPP, to get it forgiven, you have to prove that you use the money for what you study you were going to use it for. So with these grants, do you have to show what you used it for? Did you show any proof? if they didn't use the money for what they said they were going to use it for, are you going to take it back, or like how would that work?
I can't speak to the details of the SBA program. We'll have to see how they are going to monitor this, but there is significant concern about monitoring the eligible expenses. This is a grant program, and any funding that is not used appropriately or left unused will go back to the government.
But we should note that there's been a lot of work in terms of the definition of eligible funding. Working with the representatives of the IRC, we're quite confident that it is broad and comprehensive. While people are going to have to fall within those categories, there are adequate areas that they can expend that I think they'll be able to utilize the vast majority of the grants that they're eligible for. But it's less onerous than with the PPP, broader definitions. And I think the Small Business Administration is inclined to administer it with an idea of helping advance the interests of these small business rather than having a gotcha situation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Representative Blumenauer. And thank you all, everyone who has joined today, members of the IRC and members of the press. We are delighted to be able to share this hopeful moment with you and appreciate you making the time today. And we'll let you go. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
We look forward to our next round of conversations.
Can't wait.
Thank you.